The existence of two officially released cuts of the same movie is such a unique opportunity for a reviewer like myself. I love when a single property gets multiple adaptations that can then be compared, but having both the theatrical and Snyder Cut versions of Justice League and being able to directly compare them to each other is too juicy to pass up. So I made sure to first watch and review the Justice League that released in 2017 without the context or perspective of the Snyder Cut having been released. It was an opportunity to put together my final thoughts on the Josstice League version, reviewing what I liked and disliked, and somewhat attempting to predict which things came from Joss Whedon versus Zack Snyder. And only after completing that review will I then watch Zack Snyder's Justice League and give my thoughts on it. This originally existed as 2 reviews uploaded over on Two Left Thumbs. So here I am with my own opportunity to have a Graham cut version of my Justice League reviews. The real cut that fans have been asking for all these years. Unfortunately, as a result of that move, the tenses of how I refer to things are all going to be wrong. I hope you can forgive that, and that little bit of context helps you understand where I was coming from in this video. I don't know how one movie can be the center of so many salacious headlines almost 4 years after it was released, but I don't want to spend this video digging into that gossip. Although, a lot of it seems to be more than gossip. There are plenty of daily headline news sources that have been covering all of that endlessly in ways I could never hope to touch. But I do feel that I need to at least mention the tragedy that led to Joss Whedon stepping in and finishing this movie. It's been reported that he was already heavily involved in rewrites, but taking over directing led to the sweeping changes that resulted in a tonal dissonance, zany punched-up humor, and some other odd choices. Even before Whedon was hired to take over directing the reshoots, we were unlikely to ever get a pure version of Snyder's vision. Batman vs Superman horribly underperformed, as it should have, and the studio did not have any confidence in Zack delivering. The Justice League started principal photography only 2 weeks after Batman v Superman hit theaters. Having already undergone a lengthy pre-production, what appears to have happened is they decided to let Zack Snyder stay in the driver's seat, and their solution was simply going to be to meddle with basically every single thing he did to avoid having another movie received as poorly as Batman v Superman. And if he had finished that theatrical version of the movie, with Whedon rewriting and the studio interfering, we would have just remembered it as another flop and likely moved on completely. I think the Snyder Cut movement probably wouldn't have even started. It would have been much more difficult to know who was to blame, if anyone. And in that case, you just kind of look past it and move on. Nobody ever came asking for a director's cut of Dark Phoenix. It was an ill-advised sequel to a bad movie that attempted to retell a story they had already done once, with someone behind the helm who had no idea what they were doing. There's no story to latch onto to think that maybe there was a better movie buried in there somewhere. It was bad, and it was always going to be bad. There's not that feeling of a robbed masterpiece or some generally incomplete story. That's the case for Ayer's Suicide Squad. Nobody started asking for the Ayer cut until after the Snyder Cut movement began. That movie had bad ideas, people generally didn't like it. We knew there was reshoots and studio interference. But hey, so does every movie. Justice League was really extraneous circumstances. I personally really dislike Justice League 2017 and have very little faith Snyder can do better. I thought Man of Steel was okay, and I hated Batman vs Superman. Part of my motivation for making this video is that I wanted to revisit the movie and see if it's as bad as I remember. I also want to be able to compare what we saw to what was apparently in Zack's head. Maybe he was done dirty. Or maybe he should have been dropped from the DCEU after Man of Steel. I was one of the people who proclaimed that the Snyder Cut was an annoying myth and that we would never see it because it didn't exist. Yet somehow you've all willed it into being. And if I was going to be that vocal about denying its existence, then the least I can do is give it an honest review after the second viewing of Josstice League, and then going in with an open mind to the Snyder Cut. The movie opens with an insert of a very optimistic Superman. Even without the floaty lip, it's super apparent that this came from Whedon. Zack almost never had a happy, approachable Superman on screen. But this feels like a half-baked idea, with the dialogue being fairly bland. I know realistic kids are difficult to write, but I think we could have done better than this. The movie really wants us to mourn Superman, but the problems with that are twofold. One, this memorial is not the Superman we knew. So instead we're introduced to this unknown character, one that in these few short moments I already prefer. Throughout this movie, everyone talks about how much they miss Superman. Yet in the last two movies, everyone was afraid of and hated the guy, thinking he was a scary, untrustworthy god. And two, it was so painfully obvious that Superman was never going to stay dead. There was never and has never been any tension there. Killing him and hiding his return in the marketing was a complete joke, and now they're trying to pull back at that emotional thread that was never weaved to begin with. So it's a failure of a way to start a movie, and kind of annoying. Okay, I love watching Batman flip and swing around in the Snyder movies. I know we haven't seen a lot of it, but this style of visuals, silhouette, movement, and action of Snyder's Batman are the best thing he brought to the character. Affleck does a pretty rock-solid job with Bruce and Batman. I really had to eat my words from back when that casting was first announced. I like the portrayal. Too bad everything about how Snyder wrote him as a near-retirement, off-the-rails murdering psycho is totally unearned in any of these movies. Then he goes from a murdering psycho to this happy-go-lucky team player the second Clark dies. If we would have spent time developing this Batman, it could have been one of the best. Instead, we're just left with this wasted potential. On a Batman so jacked, he looks like he could actually fist fight Superman. The second Batman starts goofballing around, I suspect we're looking at Whedon reshoots. If he did this whole scene, he did a very good job borrowing that silky smooth action style. But it's probably a combination of their work. If not, Snyder might need to worry about his job security. We have a slow-mo montage of the world mourning Superman in the most Zack Snyder way imaginable, through and through. I would even guess that the choice of a cover of Leonard Cohen's Everybody Knows came from Snyder. I feel like this is a deep fake of a scene from Watchmen. Like, we've definitely seen this before. This dude is so upset that he kicks this fruit. Yeah, you show that fruit, dude. Who's gonna stop you? Superman is dead. Oh, now I made myself feel sad. The idea of Superman acting as this nuclear deterrent to alien invasions is actually super cool. I'm totally on board with that as a catalyst for this plot. I suppose Superman had to die for that setup? If Snyder's movie plays up this angle more, I may still be convinced that the killing of Superman was after all a smart plot move, rather than the attempted emotional fake-out it ended up as. Seeing as the original plan was to have two Justice League movies, maybe he would have been dead for one entire film? And if they show the restraint to wait until halfway through that 4-hour Snyder Cut to revive him, then I'll feel like he actually did something pretty cool there. This bank heist scene with Wonder Woman is totally weird. Snyder's visuals are usually more distinct than this, but I have a hard time imagining Wonder Woman posing on this statue, these intense angles, or this muzzle flare shot aren't Snyder. He just likes to show things in a splashy, epic way, and this really feels like his style, but it's kind of watered down. Probably because there's almost no slow-mo? Maybe Whedon was kind of imitating Snyder's style here? It's fun to guess who did what, but it's hard to get a read on some of these scenes. Because we're so busy jumping around, Batman and Aquaman then have a quick chat. This honestly should have been a 10-minute long sequence with Batman showing off some sweet detective skills. If Arthur Curry has been in hiding for that long, you can at least show me that it took some effort to find him. Heck, have Bruce team up with Diana for this. They know each other a little bit and have a shared interest in continuing Superman's legacy as well as stopping future threats. Maybe we actually start establishing any sort of relationship between the two? Have them share like a single line? Even without that, I'm still a little bummed. Seemingly one of the best jokes and moments of actually showing any characters in this movie having a rapport was cut.
He said he'll fight with us?
More or less.
More or more less?
Probably more or less.
He said no.
He said no.
Without stuff like that, Bruce and Diana act like they've never met. Momoa does some heavy lifting here and sells me on Aquaman pretty quickly. I don't know if I like or hate that the movie avoided having any contrived reasons for Aquaman to use literally any of his water-based powers. I think it comes up once. That's just a side thought more than a real complaint. The fact that Billy Crudup is Barry's dad makes it pretty clear this story beat came from Snyder. Also the fact that this is then totally ignored for the rest of the runtime. I just don't see the point. The zero subtlety jokes of telling the Flash to hurry up and him running in place both feel like Snyder's writing. He's not incapable of jokes. Whedon just writes jokes in a way that are so Whedon, and I'm not quite getting that here. I'll be curious between these lines of Aquaman's,
"Mankind's melting the polar ice caps, destroying the ecosystem. They got it coming."
Hey, I don't mind if the ocean dries. Strong man as strong as alone. You ever heard that?
That's not a saying. That's the opposite of what the saying is.
Which I really enjoy, and these ones of The Flash,
I can't sit here and watch you run in place.
which I think are not very clever, which ones came from whose writing. At this point I had to stop and realize they're doing the same annoying thing Suicide Squad did. They're attempting to replace the need to introduce or establish characters by instead doing these short, disjointed sizzle reels. I mean, I guess that's better than a set of YouTube videos. But you know what works much better? Standalone movies. Just saying. It's been proven a few times that a team-up right out of the gates can work, but DC sure doesn't know how to do it. That trend continues by suddenly dumping Cyborg's entire backstory into one scene. The idea of him updating is rad as hell. Give me a 2-hour movie of Victor Stone being injured, saved by this tech, starting out like the Honda bot and ending the movie like the Terminator. Instead, that concept is relegated to a few scenes with zero real follow-through or intrigue. It's an idea that's so good, but just completely tossed on the table and left there to do nothing. I cannot remotely think who to blame for how misused and poorly executed Cyborg is. At least Ray Fisher does a good job. The dude has an epic voice, by the way.
Every day I wake up different. Modified.
He made Victor darker and more disturbed than this Bruce Wayne, and we're supposed to believe that that guy is out there killing people every night. There's something boiling beneath the surface for Victor that I want to see more of. Throughout, this movie barely touches on how useful Cyborg is. He's constantly interfacing with things and doing things behind the scenes, and honestly, in an increasingly technological world, he only becomes more useful. Those small glimpses just makes me realize how wasted he was in this movie. Once the Mother Box starts shooting sky beams within the first 20 minutes, it wins the award for the most MacGuffin. There have been a lot of silly MacGuffins in every superhero movie ever, but this is the most MacGuffin to ever MacGuffin. I cannot put into words how stupid and hacky the whole thing feels and how poorly the stakes are established. This we can blame on Snyder since it was first established in the previous movie. Zack does amazing visuals, but please don't ask him to write a captivating plot. If the story behind the Snyder Cut is as bland as this, I may never watch another movie with story by Zack Snyder ever again. We've seen screenshots of Snyder's Steppenwolf, and while it seemingly has its own problems, I'll wait to judge it in action. But what I can judge is Mr. Botox-filled Rubberface here. They did performance capture on Syrian Hines. But maybe less than they needed to since Snyder's design is so alien? With Thanos, you can still see that it's Josh Brolin. They had to make sure they were capturing every minute detail of his face. But if they thought this alien design was going to be so boxy and unhuman-like, they might not have rigged up Syrian with the most advanced version of the tech. Or it's just a sloppy result of pivoting the design so late with a limited budget and time constraints. But it looks like crap. It seems like a bad design, but that might just be the result of the bad CGI. The bad CGI might have just been working off a bad design, with weak direction or limited time and money. Now we're just pointing fingers in every direction, and it's just not worth getting hung up on. Quickly, while I am talking CGI, yes, floaty lip Superman looks unforgivably bad. It's wild how many deep fakes and fan edits have done a better job of it. But they also didn't have to worry about doing that at a quality level that could then be screened in a theater. I'll again blame time constraints and limited budgets. It's hysterically bad and pretty distracting, but I'm not going to rag on it any more than anyone already has. Those fruits are hanging lower than Clark's upper lip. I do somewhat enjoy the idea of playing keep away with the Mother Box, but that sequence is cut pretty short, just as the action is building, and the tension is totally sucked out of the scene by never establishing a goal. Maybe if there was a plan, no matter how vague, each success and hurdle would be more impactful. All this would take is a line of dialogue of someone saying, maybe we stand a chance if we make it to blank on the other side of the island. We don't need a real explanation for how that might help and why you weren't doing it already. Just something to motivate the action behind the scene. Instead, it just suddenly ends, and they look weak for even having tried. I don't get why the Amazon's ultimate signal is lighting a fire like a beacon of Gondor. How is that supposed to work thousands of years prior, before TV broadcasts? Why did this make national news? What are the odds Diana would see this? It's too dumb to handle. The narrated scene of Diana detailing Steppenwolf's defeat and the handing out of the Mother Boxes to the different kingdoms is such a shameful ripoff of Lord of the Rings. It honestly feels like someone just stuck a parody right in the middle of this movie. Like, why would they make it so similar? There's not even anything else I can say. This MacGuffin is a joke, and that writing is lazy. Cyborg tracking down Batman is actually a pretty cool move. That makes a lot of sense. But it's kinda deflated because Bruce was aware of him already. How cool would it have been if Victor was skilled enough to both avoid Batman and to track him down? This movie tried to add some group tension by Aquaman saying no, but then the next time we see him, he's on board. Cyborg being outside of the group while he's discovering himself and his powers would add some real tension. He's learning how to be a part of a team, he has to earn their trust, and we're developing everyone's relationships through that. If you're not going to give him an origin story, that's such a perfect way to make him a pivotal supporting character. Again, just such wasted potential. It's pretty goofy that they establish Cyborg as being this tech god, but then that's completely undersold by having Victor stalking Batman rather physically and just kind of ducking and covering behind a tree. That's the literal opposites of what his specialties would be. And how did you not figure out immediately that this hoodie is not doing the trick? Find a thicker jacket, Victor. Who do you think you are, Captain America? The disguise needs to be more complex. While I'm out here pitching brilliant movie plot beats, what if Barry was constantly on the move and was hard to track because of that? Now we have eager to prove himself Cyborg on the team. He could be used to hack into the city's security and surveillance and map out a pattern or something. That could be a cool use of powers and a way to earn trust. Nope. Cyborg remains a lone wolf, and the Flash has a lair with like 1,000 screens. Don't get me wrong, I love this scene. The interaction between these two is great. Bruce is a psycho for testing Barry without totally knowing his powers, but it leads to a cool-ass, very Snyder-esque scene. Zack should remain as an epic moment consultant in this universe. Even if we never let him direct another one of these movies, it's pretty obvious that someone with his eye is still needed. The bouncy humor of the Flash throughout feels more Whedon to me.
Like brunch. Like, what is brunch? You wait in line for an hour for essentially lunch.
If I was a betting man, I would say that's a Joss Whedon line. It just feels so close to what his tendencies as a writer are when he's at his worst. But everything else about the scene has me convinced it came from Snyder. At this point, I think it's fair to say Snyder is excellent at casting. Maybe he works with a great casting director, or that's all him, but every actor here is knocking it out of the park. As long as they're actually given something worthwhile to work with. That's a pretty massive caveat here. I just don't understand that in an ensemble team-up movie like this, why are our characters so rarely actually teamed up? I get that they're meant to be a bunch of loners, but we're 40 minutes in and this cast is being wasted with none of them interacting still. They keep pairing off just to meet and deliver exposition, but not a single shred of meaningful character interaction has yet to take place. We don't have the luxury of meeting these characters in a solo movie. The Avengers took 40 minutes to team everyone up, but that was a longer movie and it continued that building anticipation of the multi-film buildup. We knew these characters and now wanted to see them together. When we don't know the characters, we need to spend as much time with all of them as we can. If we want to care about the Justice League, they need to meet and team up quickly. Ideally, with a lot of friction in the team early on. Hopefully, in a 4-hour cut of all this, we'll get a proper team-up movie sooner than halfway through the runtime. We now get a second Aquaman establishing scene, except this time he's a whiskey-chugging rock-and-roll bad boy. I have to assume the White Stripes add-in is thanks to the same person who slapped fun music all over Suicide Squad. I hate this. What were they going for? Seriously. No matter how cynical Aquaman is, he should never be chucking litter into the ocean. That's like having a Batman who kills, or a Superman who doesn't care about people, or a cyborg who doesn't use technology. I guess Arthur's just going through a mopey teen rebellious phase. Maybe he's like 12 years old in fish years. I'm so glad Aquaman the movie ditched this air bubble dialogue garbage. I'll be curious if they re-edit or reshoot that for Snyder's movie, if the scene stays in at all. It's such a boring piece of exposition. So much so that I have to assume it will stay in the Snyder Cut. Flashy, efficient dialogue is not really his forte. Side note, the defense strategies on display for these boxes are atrocious. If Superman was the one thing protecting the planet, why didn't Steppenwolf steal them 1,000 times over way before Superman arrived? There's literally nothing to it. I obviously hate him calling the boxes mother all the time. I assume everyone hates that. Also super weird and kind of interesting to hear Darkseid come up. Was that planned for Justice League 2 or originally for this movie? It'd be like if Loki showed up in Avengers 1 and wouldn't stop talking about Thanos. It's like you're admitting you're a mid-boss in this story. And if we all know right from the beginning that you're not the real threat, then what's the actual danger? The stuff with this random family acting as an audience perspective feels super forced. The scenes are so bland that I can't even tell who would have filmed them. Like, it's so obviously painfully unnecessary to the movie. Since we never really meet or know any of them, this same feeling of, oh, this family's getting saved, would exist if you gave us 3 scenes of them or 1. The little sight gag of the girl pulling out bug spray is good, but not worth any of this. Is that something someone with a 4-hour movie in mind would have included? Or something someone trying to juice up a movie would have added? I cannot tell. I really like the idea of people confusing parademons for Batman. Flying, fear-based creatures that come at night? That makes so much sense. The parademons are so generic, the way almost any mass army of CGI creatures is ever going to be, but if you made them this precise way for this one reason, I would totally understand. Because this is interesting. Why is this coming 50 minutes into the movie instead of being used to establish the parademons? We can take the hint from Batman vs Superman's nightmare sequence, give the fans a little credit. I think this feels like a dope mystery to have kicked off the whole movie. Batman is essentially the main character here, but there's not much of a focal point or anything. It's so sloppy. The movie could have started with him unraveling this, discovering the parademons, realizing something bigger was going on, teaming up with Wonder Woman, going to try to convince Aquaman to join, tracking him down together. But he's a tough nut to crack. They can even have a bit of a stare down because the Atlanteans and the Amazons don't really get along. Cyborg joins up with the team, having tracked them down. They work with him to bring in Flash, and Aquaman can choose to join on his own. I'm not even changing everything. I'm mostly just moving things around and slightly changing those motivations. We could have had everyone together in 30 minutes with all the plot and stakes and villains and everything firmly established and have these characters start interacting and growing together. I cannot imagine that dragging this out longer will be better in the Snyder Cut, but maybe simply rearranging things will go a long way. Back to the movie. I love hearing a hint of Elfman's old Batman theme when they all gather on the rooftop. Honestly, without this, I wouldn't have known Elfman was involved with the movie. I had to Google it thinking it was some homage. I wish I would have heard more of his influence throughout. His soundtracks usually stand out so clearly. That's just another thing to be disappointed in. The gag of everyone bailing on Jim is pretty funny. I think it would work better if we had seen Batman do it once by himself already in this movie. Or maybe if Batman somehow did this to the full group, and then the remainder of them did it to Barry and Jim. I don't know, it's still funny as is. It could have been just that tiniest bit more. Everyone using their powers to cross this bridge is actually really funny, but completely devoid of comedic timing. Did they film it thinking it wasn't a joke? I don't know what I'm supposed to take away from the scene if it wasn't meant to be humorous. Again, a quality moment from the trailer was cut. I actually loved the line where Cyborg didn't believe Batman was real. I thought that was the coolest thing.
Didn't think you were real.
I'm real when it's useful.
Well, it's incredibly unlikely that this big huge man in a bat suit beat up thugs in Gotham for 20 years and nobody knew if it was real or not. It is a really cool take on the mythos of Batman that they could have used to much greater effect. We have a character who's a literal technology wizard and has access to potentially every bit of information there is, no matter what clearance level of security, and maybe he still struggled to stitch together whether Batman was real. That line would have hit even harder if Cyborg had tracked Batman. I really hated this movie on a first watch, and now in a second, I'm mostly just disappointed. There were cool ideas buried in here somewhere, and for the first time, I'm maybe starting to get excited for the Snyder Cut, just to see a different take on this. But from what I'm familiar with of Snyder's work, I don't think he's going to take it in a direction I like. Barry wigging out and needing to be pep-talked works well for me. that makes sense. He's never really been a hero before. This is the one time where not having an origin film might actually be utilized beneficially. It very much has the same energy as Hawkeye motivating and mentoring Wanda in Age of Ultron, and in that way, it's probably Whedon just kind of recycling that idea. At least Batman contributes this, because he gets hilariously outmatched the second he tries to do anything. He summons his Nightcrawler.
Alfred, I need the Nightcrawler.
Come on, dude. You never thought you'd have to say that in front of people, did you? Cyborg starts the fight trying to one-man Steppenwolf. That's stupid, because he doesn't at all understand his own abilities or powers yet. But also makes sense that they wouldn't work well as a team yet. The more odd thing here is that Victor seemingly disappears for almost the rest of the entire fight. The action's not particularly well sold overall. When I see the slow-mo and lightning flying all over the place, it looks pretty cool, I guess, but it has this half-baked generic quality to it. Maybe the lightning should be toned down and made more subtle or even tinted yellow? Maybe that'd be too much. I really hope that the solo Flash movie gets made and we see that director put their own stamp on Barry's powers and special effects the way James Wan did with Aquaman. This just needs updating to me. I remember seeing headlines about this little gag with Barry landing on Wonder Woman. Gal Gadot did not want to film the scene, so Whedon did it with a body double. This is one of the few scenes outside of Superman's upper lip. The supper lip? Super upper lip? Outside of those scenes that I know Whedon did, or he at least inserted this gag if not doing the larger scene, because the slow-mo action still feels very Snyder-like. I don't mind the gag, as I think the joke is that Barry is a klutz more than anything else, but it's not sexual, and I can understand Gal not wanting to include it. The joke could have worked with them falling in a less sexualized placement, and Barry still getting up awkwardly, or an even better compromise would be for them to have landed separately, Barry gets up quickly, then instead selling us on that same uncomfortable awkwardness with Barry simply not knowing whether it's proper to offer his help to this Amazon princess who's fallen over. One thing that drives me crazy in this movie is how useless Batman is. Modern Batman is all about having plans A through Z for every conceivable scenario. That tactical planning paired with his wealth is his advantage. This was one thing Snyder at least attempted to do in Batman vs Superman, just to show that there is a scenario where Batman could kill Superman. Yeah, he has a lot of money and tech, but it's the way he employs it and plans ahead that makes him more than just a useless addition to the team. This movie has him getting tossed all over the place, beaten and battered, and with almost zero thought to his actions. He's been Batman for 20 years and seemed prepared to die when the harbor flooded this room. It's not the only time he's seen woefully unprepared, and it's just disappointing to see. We now hit the halfway point of this movie, and honestly, I am almost positive that every single scene, plot point, joke, and anything in between came straight from Whedon from here on in. Literally, potentially 100%. I'd consider putting money on that. All the settings are brighter, the pace and tone shifts almost entirely, and the focus is more heavily on these characters riffing off each other, more than them just holding cool cinematic poses. Plus, knowing that they turned what would have been 2 movies into one, I can start to imagine this was all entirely rewritten to be wrapped up within the studio-mandated 2 hours and the single movie, and that would have required heavy Whedon revisions, and at that point, they potentially just rewrote the entire second half. Their explanation for reviving Superman is insane. Like, it's somehow less explained and more illogical than the Mother Box Unity plot itself. Yet everyone instantly knows what is meant and agree that it could theoretically work? How do they know Clark hasn't rotted away in the ground? Have people been checking? Why is that common knowledge? At least Tony Stark spent like one whole evening inventing time travel. Can Bruce and the team at least spend longer than 2 sentences inventing necromancy? Diana and Bruce start debating this, and we're supposed to take which side exactly? And not in the way that I think both Tony and Cap had valid arguments. Bruce has gone batshit crazy here. This doesn't feel like a 2-sided disagreement. Their personalities are too poorly established to actually clash in a believable way. Instead, they just raise their voices until Cyborg calls Bruce an asshole and they just decide to go for it. And the plan they execute is to send Flash and Cyborg to straight up grave rob that same night? No stealth, no cover, no plan, no powers even to speed up the process? I guess there was no way to make that not feel insane, so they just speed past it and made it a joke? okay. They then go to the Kryptonian ship that has apparently been entirely abandoned. Nobody cares about this hunk of alien tech anymore. It's trash. Just leave it there to let the neighborhood kids run wild with. Next is the best bit of unintentional comedy in the entire movie.
You lunatics better know what you're doing.
Followed immediately by Aquaman tossing Clark's dead body in a muddy puddle. How is this their plan? Cut to, it worked. Somehow. Okay, Aquaman is comedy gold in this movie. His delivery on...
He's not alright.
It's just so good. Having read Stephen King's Pet Sematary between my viewings of this movie, I now appreciate the setup and payoff of Barry's line much more.
Right. But we mean bring him back in like a yay, he's back way, not in like a Pet Cemetery scenario. Pet Cemetery.
That's incredibly representative of what we're seeing, and the exact sort of not-so-pop culture jokes that Whedon always does. Superheroes fighting is dope. I'm happy anytime there's an excuse to see these all-powerful beings throw down. Whedon obviously loves that, and so do I. In the Avengers, they couldn't get along. In Ultron, Wanda messes with their minds and makes them turn on each other. Just give me more of that. It's always a blast. Except in this fight, Superman just punches everyone? It's like the worst version of this concept. Although this scene does include the best moment in the entire movie. My jaw dropped in the theaters when the Flash tries to sneak up behind Superman, and in slow motion, we see Clark's eye turn to watch Barry in real time. Bam! It's so unsettling and so epic. Barry's slowly dawning, oh shit face after is just as good. It's a shame that I think this is a Whedon scene, because it'll likely be absent in the Snyder Cut. Oh, I could just watch that 1,000 times. Superman then punches Barry, headbutts Wonder Woman, slaps Batman, and the fighting is over? All he did is physically hit everyone once? How did almost every hero in this fight essentially fail to show any of their powers? I remember when making Ultron, Whedon specifically added Wanda and Pietro as an excuse to film powers other than punching after making that first Avengers movie with a bunch of punching-based superheroes in it. Why is that all anyone seems to do here? Bringing back Do You Bleed was the worst. I'm a huge sucker for callbacks. Marvel does that all the time. Why do I hate this one so much? Is it because I never had confidence that the original line was even any good? The idea of flipping it on Batman should be great. It just doesn't land. Batman then joking about it after is again a bit too much for me too. It's almost there, but not quite. That moment screams Whedon, other than Superman's obviously floaty lip. It's just so forced. The best way I can sum up the rest of this movie is to talk about my note-taking on my little notepad while watching. In the first 80 minutes, I took 9 pages of notes. And for the last 40 minutes, I took 2 pages. The third act is as bland and uninteresting as it possibly could have been. Most superhero movies struggle to make the big CGI battle literally noteworthy. Some do it better than others. DC has struggled the most consistently, and this movie is no exception. Rather than suffering through this back act of the movie in any great length, let's just fire off a bullet list of some basic thoughts I had. How did Steppenwolf know to avoid the internet? The movie specifically explains that, but not in any level of depth that actually satisfies. This cooperative Batman doesn't really do anything for me since we never really saw or understood loner Batman first. I increasingly hate Cyborg's chrome-on-chrome design. The more I look at it, the more it's just kind of a mess. Aquaman getting truth lassoed is the best gag in the whole movie, by a mile.
Maybe I'm scared because I'm meant to...
Batman with goggles just is Night Owl. I'm not sure who let Snyder get away with using that design twice. In general, I think I dislike Snyder's washed out costumes and designs here. I actually loved them in Watchmen. They fit that drab, cynical world well. But he uses the same stylings here, and I'm not feeling it at all. These heroes look like they all hired the same designer, with the instructions being to make their eclectic looks look like they belonged together. We have a cyborg, a billionaire, an Amazon princess, this fish boy, an alien from outer space, and a kid that I don't even know where he would have got his costume. Why would they possibly look so similar? Luckily, Wan embraced and improved the Aquaman costume. I wish Jenkins did more than turn up the saturation for Wonder Woman 1984. I sincerely hope Andy Muschietti does something new with The Flash. One thing I did like from Batman vs Superman is the design of this Batman. I still think that silhouette is strong, and the costume fits this grim, dark take on the character. But specifically, he's Batman. He should probably have a drab, dark, dull suit. Why is Aquaman's suit as dull and dark and giving strong sad boy energy the same way? I'm just not really a fan of any of this. Back to Batman. His suicide mission plan is so stupid and goes back to the problem that this Batman is ill-prepared. If they were going for the idea that he was phoning it in and doesn't care if he dies, that's super dark and could have made a great plot point. Instead, he's just being brash and careless. And it just feels like he, forgot to make a plan. Interrupting Steppenwolf's speech is very Whedon.
Oh no. You're all mine.
I was writing a note every other page, basically saying, this is still Whedon, right? Oh, that's clearly a Whedon joke. Still seems like he's behind the wheel. Once he recycled this joke he used in the first Avengers, I was beyond convinced that this entire second half of the movie was fully in his control. I like seeing the Flash being klutzy and learning on the fly. Having a rookie hero is a lot of fun. It's just too bad that we've never really seen any of the vets doing their thing before either. Superman's truth and justice line is a delightful kind of cheesy.
I believe in truth. But I'm also a big fan of justice.
I'd be down for more of that from the Golden Boy. Wonder Woman's go-to move is slapping her bracers together. Going way back to that don't make me do this moment. Why is this so overpowered? She thought she was gonna actually meaningfully hurt Superman with this one move? That's such a weird one, because it makes it seem like her tool is what's powerful and not her. I'm just saying, she seemed more powerful in her 3 minutes of action in Batman vs Superman than she does in this entire movie. Steppenwolf... Speaking of seemingly underpowered, Steppenwolf goes down so easily. Aquaman just stabs him. I guess that makes sense if he was only meant to be a mini-boss. Clark starts goofing with Cyborg about wanting to die again. It's kind of messed up, but it's actually pretty funny. And all I can think is how much I hate the portrayal of Superman in those other two movies. And that had so obviously never been Henry Cavill's fault. Watch The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and tell me he's not one of the most charismatic guys working. To cast him and have Superman turn out so bland, that's just the biggest tragedy in these movies. That just bums me out in ways I can't even put into words. I'm a fan of Cyborg's booyah moment.
Booyah.
I'm genuinely unsure what other people make of it. Like, actually, I want to hear from you. Is it forced? Does it work for you? Do you like it in general? What's up with the apocalyptic events turning to flowers after? What am I watching? A Fantastic Beasts movie? This line has the exact same energy.
How did you get the house back from the bank?
I bought the bank.
As a moment from Inception.
I bought the airline. It seemed later.
The movie then ends with a montage of everyone's problems being miraculously solved. In seemingly unrelated ways. Barry and his dad are doing great. Cyborg and his dad are cool. Aquaman goes home, I guess. Literally none of these plot points had more than one scene prior, so I don't really care about them being resolved. Like, do they even count as plot points? I couldn't care less about any of it. Lois Lane's narration feels like it was written and recorded in one day when they realized this ending didn't have anything actually worth saying. It's all so bland and generic, and for some reason coming from Lois, rather than Batman, who seemingly is the character who grew the most in this movie, or at least he should have been. He should have learned that he needs a team. Instead, he had already decided that before the movie, and so instead we just see him pushing to fulfill that rather than learning anything. He brings back to life the guy he spent the last movie trying to kill, and there's no lesson learned there, except for good thinking Bruce. It kind of feels like they realized they had Amy Adams on contract for another day, and that maybe they needed to give her more to do in the movie. I don't know, it just kind of ends after that, with one of just the most hollow feelings imaginable. At least we have this mid-credit foot race. This is hilarious. It's the best Superman has ever been in 3 movies.
But if I win, you're off the team.
Too bad we never established any relationship between Barry and Clark before this. They exchanged like one line. But if this was a building rivalry of them kind of alternating outdoing one another, now proving it once and for all, that would have been great. It's a scene that works devoid of context, but would have been so incredible if they'd bothered to have these characters know each other at all. It's a funny moment, and at least I end my experience on a positive note. but a nice piece of chocolate cake after a 3-course meal of mostly inedible garbage doesn't go very far. I summarized how I would have rearranged the beginning of the movie, and I think that would have gone a long way. From that point, I would have just made the focus more about getting to know the characters. I don't care if the threat is kind of vague. I can live with that, I'm used to seeing it. Yes, I would have liked if some effort was made with Steppenwolf for the mother boxes to make any of that interesting. But if we would have corrected the setup for the movie, then maybe the rest of the pace and tone and development would have all fell into place a little better. That was potentially never going to work with 2 directors hacking together their own writing, directing, and editing, and those will be some of the biggest ways I think Zack could improve this. Even if he kept it to 2 hours. I have no idea what he's going to do with 4. Cyborg and Ray Fisher were totally wasted. Batman is severely underpowered here. He doesn't need to match everyone else, but he needs to be more than helpless. Flash being a newbie makes sense, I'm not worried about that. They tell us and kind of show us how powerful Aquaman and Wonder Woman are, and a weird way they imply that they're actually too powerful to fail. They're just like a couple of gods, same as Superman. And if everyone is that strong and powerful and struggles this little against a major villain, then it's hard to care about any of the characters. Let alone the fact that you never gave them meaningful personalities. And just the worst costumes. I don't remember this bothering me a few years ago. I actually think my opinion might have been affected by the fact that The Boys has so thoroughly lampooned this style of costume design, while also somehow producing better, more appealing looking costumes. It's like this movie came out, and I thought, yeah, okay, sure, that works. Then The Boys came out, and I remember thinking, yeah, that's well done. That is kind of how all his costumes look, isn't it? Then you come back to this movie and realize it's Zack's costume style done better. So yeah, I really can't get over that. I mostly enjoy the humor throughout. I like when my superheroes are jokey. And while a few things are a little more forced than others, I think there was room to maybe even build on this more. But there's an obvious dissonance in the tone and style here. We either needed more of the Whedon-style quips while being maybe a little bit more selective about which ones made the final cut, or none of it whatsoever and take the whole thing a little more seriously. The entire plot of the movie is so awful, and it's so upsetting to see ways it could have been built on and salvaged, but that's the entire point of a director's cut. This second viewing kinda convinced me that there's reason for this to exist. I went from thinking it was such a stupid waste of time and money to thinking it's an incredibly interesting, worthwhile waste of time and money. Like seriously, it seems really unfair to give Zack that much money for this weird passion project. I don't know if we really needed to give Zack more money, not because I have anything against him, but there's a lot of other cancelled or unproduced movies out there that maybe this money should have gone towards instead. But hey, I'm officially kind of excited. I want to see where this goes. But if the parts of this movie that I think were Zack were actually his, then I'm in for a movie that has twice the runtime, but filled with the parts of this movie that I didn't particularly like. Even if there's a lot of good stuff, I think at that length, it can only be worse for the movie as a whole. I don't know. This is fun for me. I really actually enjoy coming back to this. I'm so excited to see how it all comes together. It's a weird thing trying to collect your thoughts on a movie, knowing that the very next thing you're going to do is collect your thoughts on an alternate cut of the very same movie, so I'll try not to make things too repetitive. It'll be really interesting for me to see if I was right about which director specific scenes or lines came from. Hopefully that's interesting for you as well. You'll have to let me know what you think of the Josstice League cut of this movie. And stick around, because now with this refresher of what the theatrical cut was, I can move straight into my first viewing of Zack Snyder's Justice League. I was lucky enough to receive a screener for Zack Snyder's Justice League earlier this week, and have put as much time as I could into organizing my thoughts. Because yeah, I had a lot of them. I plan to give a summary at the top here without any spoilers, just kind of looking at things quite broadly. And after that overview, the majority of this video will be dedicated to a very spoiler-heavy look at how everything was reshaped and recontextualized for the Snyder Cut. I owe these two movies a thanks for their dramatically different aspect ratios. Other than just differences in color grading, it's going to be so obvious which version I'm talking about by using footage from each. I'll be kind of going scene by scene the way I did with my other Justice League review, but I'll jump around when it makes sense and try to speak to larger points throughout. For things that specifically didn't change, like the costumes, I won't retread any of that ground here. But believe me, there's a lot that did change. Starting that off, I had no idea how little the story was actually going to be changed. I suspected that the entire back half of the theatrical cut was new content. It turns out that Whedon's contributions really did come down to reshoots. He had pickups, punch-ups, alterations, and add-ins through literally every scene of this movie. It was mostly about removing Zack's scenes, or filming these weird one-to-one replacements. It made sense on occasion to dance around specific removed plot points, but other times he reshot scenes just because. In Whedon's movie, he cut, removed, and changed the plot so dramatically that it might as well have been a different movie, even if it's hitting those same main story beats throughout. But start to finish, the tone, context, editing, and execution of them are as different as night and day. I was under the impression that Zack had to refilm a lot of things. I thought his movie was incomplete. It turns out he left the project in that post-production phase. That's wild to me. This movie, as we see it now, could have been what came out in theaters. Apparently, only the nightmare sequence was actually new footage, and that's a few minutes of fan service tagged onto the movie. In hindsight, it's crazy that nobody could appreciate the movie they had on hand. On one side, can I really blame them? After Batman vs Superman and Suicide Squad bombed, obviously everyone was reacting in a panic here and attempted to spice it up the same way they did with Suicide Squad. Zack did not have a lot of goodwill. My main thoughts going in were that Man of Steel was okay. Batman vs Superman was hot garbage. The director's cut of that movie was slightly better, but still pretty bad. And that the theatrical Justice League was somewhere in between those two, definitely on the bad side of the scale. After a rewatch, it bumped up slightly, but still bad. Because the Batman vs Superman director's cut failed to make that movie much better, I assumed the Snyder Cut would simply be this fun moment in pop culture, not something of any real quality. But damn, dare I say it? The Snyder Cut is good. Like, genuinely. Quite good. Definitely the best of Snyder's trilogy, and in some confusing way, the fact that it acts as more of a sequel to Batman vs Superman adds to the movie? I didn't expect that. I disliked that movie so strongly that I thought more attachment to it would be a bad thing. And I have to assume every movie executive and producer thought the same. The silly MacGuffin plot of mother boxes, and the new MacGuffin plot of the anti-life equation, yup, that's a real thing apparently, and Batman turning on a dime so quickly are major through lines of this movie that are hard to look past. Those things certainly were not improved. The movie is also clearly overly long. But this is what people asked for. Let Snyder do what he wants and include as much as he wants. And in that way, I cannot fault the length. I would hate to sit in theaters for 4 hours, that's just too long. But at home, in full control of that experience, it was great. The journey to get here was absolutely insane, but if Snyder ever would have been allowed to release his movie in theaters, even without reshoots from another director, it would have been hacked down to 3 hours at the most. I'm gonna say maybe like 240. This was somehow the only way we were gonna get to see his full vision, and that's kinda crazy. The movie's broken into these 6 acts, so there are really logical stopping points. I had watched the 2-hour theatrical cut in 2 sittings on 2 different nights because I was just kind of over it. Yet I watched the full 4 hours of this all in one go. I was right there along for the ride. The pacing is somehow brilliant. It's one of the best aspects of this new cut. It's hard to have 4 hours go by and not have the audience feel constantly aware of that length. A few scenes drag in very notable ways, but it's really nice to have an epic superhero movie that takes a beat like this. I'm going to talk about this more, but I suspect Snyder took some major cliff notes from watching Peter Jackson's extended Lord of the Rings trilogy. Besides some broad plot irritants and long length, the way the characters and story unfold and grow is far superior to the theatrical cut. I'm really stumbling on this, talking about the original version, trying to avoid phrasings like that. Yes, I realize that Zack's movie is the original version, but please understand if I ever use that in this video. The theatrical cut is the first, it's the original. Zack's is the one I will be referring to as new, and that's just based chronologically. So the pacing, a few minor missteps, but it flows incredibly well. The theatrical cut does a Suicide Squad-esque quick introduction of every character back to back, yet still fails to team them up till halfway through the movie. I had said I wanted a quicker team up than that. I thought that would be very important to a successful movie. But Snyder spaces all of this way out. The Flash isn't even in the movie until 1 full hour in, and the full team up again comes closer to halfway through. The reason this works as an improvement, rather than once again having the issue of delaying that team up, is that all that extra runtime is spent getting to know these characters. I thought if we weren't going to get to know them through solo origin films, then we might as well get them together and get to know these characters by having them bounce off one another. I was wrong. It works better to space them out, because in a way you can give them these backdoor solo mini movies. It also shows that it was a genuine struggle to get everyone together. This movie was always going to be disadvantaged in this way compared to the Avengers, and that all those characters were already established. And while that was still a stupid choice on DC's part to rush things, it all works far better with this extra breathing room. This fails in the 2017 version because we don't know any of these characters. My rewatch left me wishing that Cyborg had been better utilized. It turns out he had the most well-developed character arc in the entire movie. Without the privilege of a solo film, there is an impressive amount of backstory and character exploration on display here. His relationship with his father is at the heart of this entire movie. It's a pretty big deal and absent from Whedon's version. I'm going to talk about that a lot throughout. Is this new iteration magically the best superhero movie ever, like some people seem to be claiming? I would disagree on that. I think we can pump our brakes a little bit. Is it among the best movies of the current DC? Absolutely. I would say my main takeaway from this viewing is that there was a 3-hour long movie in here somewhere. About 20 to 30 minutes of the cuts feel obvious to me, and I'm sure quite a lot of the for fun, fan servicey stuff tacked on at the end in the epilogue could definitely be tossed. And if this 3-hour Justice League was the one that hit theaters, we would be witnessing a very different trajectory for the DC universe. The reception would have been much better, as well as the box office performance, even though I'm sure it would have suffered thanks to Batman vs Superman, but I bet it would have done enough that we'd be getting a Darkseid-focused sequel that after seeing this, I would genuinely be interested in seeing. I have to eat my words. This was not your typical studio interference and script notes. This movie was hacked apart and butchered. Some of the most important characters and plot points were ripped entirely out of it. And do you know what that does? It leaves obvious gaping holes. So yeah, Snyder was done dirty, and I would absolutely recommend watching his final vision. The worst thing that could have happened was that his cut was mediocre. If the Snyder Cut was bad, then people could just accept that the reshoots, while a failure, were probably necessary. If the movie had only been okay, the fandom would have remained ravenous, fighting over a subpar movie and demanding that this again wasn't Zack's true vision. But giving us this solid, in my mind, 7 to 8 out of 10 movie means that Snyder had a story in mind and was robbed of a potential success. I was dead wrong, and everyone asking to release the Snyder Cut deserves some commendation for their perseverance. While Whedon fundamentally changed the tone and context of most scenes, a lot of what Zack filmed did surprisingly still make it into the final cut. One of the most interesting aspects of this is seeing the ways in which Whedon tries to hammer his square peg into this movie's round hole by often imitating Zack's style to keep this movie directorially consistent. I mean, that's the job he was hired to do, and the fact that his own style so often creeped into the final product was one of the biggest issues with that other version. A great example is the opening sequence of the movie. This entire Watchmen ripoff apparently came from Whedon, and Batman flipping around on the rooftops, also from him. No more slow-mo fruit kick and no more rooftop robber, and looking at it now, it maybe should have registered that this fruit kick lacks the spectacle of a typical Snyder moment. Sure, it slowly zooms or pans in slow motion, but Zack usually does that with far more visual intent. If anything, this really solidifies to me that he really is a master of that epic spectacle, and it's harder to recreate than I might have thought. Slow-mo fruit flying through the air now reads like a parody to me, and it probably should have before. In pursuit of the grand, epic, mythic scale of this story, Snyder obviously took a few notes from the Lord of the Rings franchise. It's mostly quite subtle, but it's certainly there. And that makes a lot of sense. Those are the most successful movies of that scale ever made. Pretty admirable that it seems like he was pursuing that with his superhero movie. And I mean, hey, before Lord of the Rings, people thought fantasy was pretty silly. And I think that's what Zack was trying to do here. But it's comical to see that Whedon picked up on that, despite the fact that the movie was, no longer massive and grand, and in his attempt to follow Zack's lead, somehow ran with it far too literally, ending up with this parody-like scene later on. Seeing as there were parts that I both liked and disliked about the epic scale of this saga, I'm now seeing that the parts I liked came from Zack. And who knows what would have happened if he was allowed the opportunity to conclude this series. Maybe he could have made the most awesome feeling superhero ever made. It a little bit seems to have been building up to that. I have issues with Zack's filmmaking in a variety of small ways. Certain things he's done are far worse than others, but having this direct comparison of what he does best and another high-quality superhero director trying to do the same, man, has my respect for Snyder as a director grown. Now is the time to start going deeper into specifics, which will all be very heavy in spoilers for both movies, but especially the Snyder Cut. Now is the time to hop out if you've decided you simply want to watch it for yourself. The new opening is so much more amazing. We see the death of Superman all over again, but this time he is howling in such agony that his screams are echoing for thousands of miles. For some reason in like a 2D plane, but that's being nitpicky. It's a cool ass concept. And it actually kicks off the plot in a way that becomes very important to the movie as a whole. This is the first of 100 different confusing exclusions from the Whedon cut. Little moments that were trimmed back that actually explain a critical detail, but they didn't bother replacing or explaining it in a different way. This is some of what the Batman vs Superman director's cut fixed, is just cleaning up the plot, making things more clear. It's so much more dramatic when you're replacing someone else's work. Superman's shouts are so intense it cracks 2 of the mother boxes. I have to wonder, if his scream was that powerful, how did it not topple buildings, do other damage, break some glasses? But I can forgive that. Maybe it's some alien dog whistle frequency, I don't know. At least they gave an attempt at a reason for the boxes to suddenly wake up. Although Cyborg's doesn't wake up in the same way, even though he was much closer in proximity. I guess since it was stored in this modern protective case, rather than some billion-year-old hunk of steel, that part they do not explain. But I can get over it, because it still works better than the alternative. The bigger question is why this ancient alien technology is hidden on the floor of a closet in your apartment. They couldn't think of anywhere better? Batman meeting Aquaman is a mixed bag. Whedon cut a few things that I maybe agree with, like Bruce waving around his cash, because in Zack's mind that appears to be the only thing Batman's good for, and a line specifically hyping up what a badass Bruce is. Felt a little too on the nose. I still miss this particular line.
Mankind's melting the polar ice caps, destroying the ecosystem. They got it coming.
Hey, I don't mind if the ocean dries.
I had to laugh at the fact that this line was in both cuts.
Strong man as strong as alone. You ever heard that?
But this joke after...
That's not a saying. That's the opposite of what the saying is.
...was added in a way that is essentially Whedon saying to Zack, "You're not funny." I thought the full interaction was Whedon, but turns out it's only this weird meta punchline of one writer dunking on another. I'm guessing that's not his intent, because Joss didn't think people would eventually see Zack's version of this scene, but it's hard not to read into now. I don't really like this little chorus section, it goes on way too long. It definitely has some thematic importance, having these women sing in reverence and respect of this godlike being that they don't understand. But does anyone truly understand this dark and troubled boy? And that's an interesting parallel when we have Bruce, who is specifically afraid of individuals wielding that sort of power. The idea of having literal folklore playing out in front of these people's eyes is kind of amazing. Apparently the translation of the lyrics is this song about an incredible being whose likes we'll never see again. I'm really into what this scene was about, but come on, it could have been half as long and carried the same weight and meaning. I know Snyder had all the time in the world with this edit, but I think more restraint was needed in some of these segments. You don't have to drag it out just because you can. There's a new scene of Lois Lane being sad. It's overly long, as are a lot of things in this movie. I'm pointing that out as a source of a potential cut, but again, it kind of works in a 4-hour at-home experience, because this scene, shockingly, is critically important. It's tough because moping around in the rain for 3 minutes is obviously too long, but if they'd cut it down to 30 seconds and slipped it in somewhere, it would have felt clunky and abrupt. It's kind of lose-lose. I guess they could have refilmed it. But it needs to be here to set up that Lois visits the monument every day. It's so stupid later in the Whedon version when Lois just hops out of a car out of nowhere. This time, she was already there. That makes so much more sense. The Wonder Woman bank heist scene is largely the same as I had guessed it would be. There's a few too many distinct Snyder moments and visual cues in there. Yet I was surprised by the subtle ways it was updated. One, we get the first of 3 F-bombs in this movie. It's a horribly stupid throwaway made by someone off camera, so why bother? This line from Diana also felt a little uncharacteristic.
Now, who are you?
A small group of reactionary terrorists.
Boring. Why the hostages?
And more like something a raging Hulk might say. I just laugh at it hearing it back.
I'm bored. You're boring, Zoidberg. I'm gonna go watch TV.
And I don't really think it was played off as a joke. But the biggest changes are the soundtrack and the action. Changing composers late in the post-production of the theatrical cut was pretty controversial. I didn't think much of it, but in the end, Elfman's score of that movie was a throwaway. None of it stood out to me, except for one moment where he uses his old Batman theme. This one instead actually expands on the intended tone of nearly every scene. It is a phenomenal score. That change alone affects so much of the movie. I'll give a few more examples throughout, but it's pretty well movie-wide. I will say that this Amazonian Wonder Woman chorus thing gets used 1 trillion times in the movie. It's such a lazy, poor use of a leitmotif. It rarely changes or is used with any real discrimination. If Wonder Woman is on screen at all, we get at least 3 seconds of this. And it did start to get irritating fairly quickly. It's so in your face, it's so loud, it's over the top, and it's just the same every time. Wonder Woman's theme is already pretty balls to the wall. You have to be sparing with it, and this is just, it's too much. The action here is insane. This is to Wonder Woman what this scene was for Batman, or this one for Captain America. It turns her into this explosive, graceful, smooth, dangerous force. I don't know how heavily Zack is involved in editing his action scenes, but I have to think the answer is very. Because if this was filmed, and this is true of any action scene in this movie, then why didn't it translate like this into the theatrical cut? Good thing you stopped that bomb from going off inside the building, eh, Diana? Maybe you should have just punched him at super speed when he took the time to reload? It's moments like this where Zack is favoring the epic moment over anything remotely logical. If you're going to endanger everyone this much, why bother stopping the crime at all? The scene is capped with Wonder Woman checking on everyone, which is very sweet and makes complete sense for her character. But then it ends with this very clunky-ass exchange.
Can I be like you someday?
You can be anything you want to be.
Hacky dialogue aside, I'm guessing Whedon cut this because these children just watched Wonder Woman kill a bunch of people. They're probably traumatized, not admiring her. After this movie, I'm willing to give much more credit to Snyder as a storyteller. I think he sucks at telling succinct stories. That should be obvious by the fact that this is so long and he has to keep making director's cuts of everything. Given the time, he can do quite well. He's earning a bit of goodwill back from me, but man oh man, he isn't great at individual scene dialogue. Not consistently, at least. I can see why script punch-ups were ordered to begin with. That script note just shouldn't have turned into add jokes every 3 minutes the way Whedon clearly interpreted it. And while I'm mentioning a moment or a line I didn't like, I do have to say that 2 of my favorite lines from in that trailer were added back in. This movie isn't devoid of humor or fun moments, but often these things get a little too cheesy, hacky, or on occasion exposition heavy. Steppenwolf's arrival is the exact reason that we should never judge CGI until we've seen it in action. When they revealed this look, it felt like some sort of Spike Lord, spikes on spikes alien that I would have designed when I was 6 years old, and then applied some cool holographic effect to. But in movie, this is so clearly and immediately better than what came before. His eyes are maybe a bit far apart, and because of that look kinda doofy on occasion, but his more alien face looks much scarier, and this dude is enormous, standing like 2 feet taller, with these absolutely shredded big tree trunk arms and more inhuman proportions. Why did they think they needed to update this? Oh man, we need a more humanoid villain. What a downgrade. Steppenwolf's armor shifts and moves, adapting to incoming attacks and his surroundings in this incredible, undeniably alien way. It feels like this set of living chainmail, rather than spikes, or kind of like the Destroyer from Thor the way I thought it might. Even the vocal effect applied to Syrian Hind's performance is enhanced and improved.
Millennia in exile, searching. At last you call me home. I have come to enlighten you to the great darkness. I will bathe in your fear.
This fits this movie so much better. He is obviously more of a threat, and that is inarguably established by the way he starts body-checking horses and shrugging off arrows. This dude can and will mess you up. It drives me wild when people stop and talk on a battlefield in a movie, but it's all the more infuriating when you're the one carrying the thing the bad guy is after. Get a move on. Stop looking behind you. Stop talking with people. Get out of there. With that, the action in this scene is still rather unmotivated, as their goal is simply to keep moving. I took issue with that before. There's nowhere specific they're trying to go, and so the goalpost is infinite and it takes some of the tension out of the scene, but it is a little more forgivable when it's been better established exactly how unexpected the box waking up was. They didn't have time for a plan B. That thing woke up and Steppenwolf showed up. So it's definitely better, but I still think that could have been improved. It took around now, just about 30 minutes in, to establish any real stakes in the movie. Even Steppenwolf showing up isn't much of a stake establishment. We can assume he's bad and that he wants the box. We don't know what happens when he gets the box. Batman's assembling this team operating on hypotheticals only, and I was just starting to wonder when they would attempt to explain the real threat, right when it showed up in the plot. I was writing notes in my notebook, and at the top of one page, I wrote threats established, and the next note was, yep. So again, maybe that's credit for good pacing. That was the appropriate place for it in the movie. Alerting Diana through their beacon of Gondor is still kind of stupid, but at least they explained that they blessed the arrow, rather than just starting a fire that somehow made the news and hoping Diana would see it. The blessing scene is like 5 minutes long for some reason, but I'm now 50-50 on that as a plot point instead of outright hating it. I would probably also cut the section spent on Silas talking about the missing mother box from the Star's lab. I get that we're trying to spend more time with this character, but I think the audience could have inferred most of what they had to say with this scene. It is an example of how he is crucially threaded throughout the movie very early on. It's interesting to see that the fallout of this scene is where the parademon sketch first comes from, but that establishment isn't super necessary. That could easily have been tweaked to come from somewhere else the way Whedon did it. And in general, he actually attempted to improve the plot point of the parademons being this poorly understood fear equivalent to Batman. Without Batman chasing a lead on the rooftop, this part of the story is almost non-existent except for Jim Gordon receiving that sketch. A sketch that is hilariously more Batman-like in the Snyder Cut. Like it barely isn't Batman. Really shatters any illusion of subtlety there. This looks like a 4-year-old was describing Batman to a 7-year-old. And it's a weird inclusion if you don't plan to do anything with it. I still maintain that this mystery should have been Batman's motivation for wanting to assemble a team as soon as possible. He's spent 20 years in Gotham punching thugs with guns, and suddenly there's aliens? Yeah, you're gonna need a team. But this movie did give more weight to Superman's death, and therefore did a better job convincing me that Bruce would feel that he owed it to the world, and to Clark to fill that protective void. That motivation is still stupidly at odds with what we saw in Batman vs Superman. It's just slightly better done here than in 2017, but all of it's a little rough. Diana inexplicably does some tomb raiding. She appears to be guessing at this, yet figures it out immediately, and then reveals something she both seem to already know is there, but is seeing it for the first time. I could buy that she was aware of it in some way, but had just never been there. But nobody just ever talked about the time that the world almost ended, and everyone banded together to stop that from happening? What? Why? That seems like it would be one of the most important parts of your cultural history. Aquaman's whiskey-chugging slow-mo scene is no longer Suicide Squatted with some icky thump. We now have the slow and emotional There Is a Kingdom by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. It's kinda cool. The scene is now less about Aquaman being some rebellious badass, and more about a moment of introspection, I guess. He's a king, there is a kingdom. I think it was just meant to look cool, but as a whole, it's a scene that probably could have simply been cut after him saving the fisherman. Next, we have a 2-minute scene that's there to tie this more directly into the Aquaman solo film and help set that up, and this is probably not needed, regardless of if the Snyder Cut is canon or not. It's not needed unless you're unwilling to give up this opportunity to see Willem Dafoe look more like a goblin than he ever did in Spider-Man. Seriously, he looks like a really damp Grima Wormtongue here. Maybe equally damp looking. Are you seeing how frequently things remind me of Lord of the Rings? It comes up a lot. Now, cutting Diana's tomb raiding scene is one thing, but at large, the ways Whedon had to bend over backwards to cut Darkseid from the plot is insane to witness. His version had one throwaway line from Steppenwolf,
For the unity! For Darkseid.
And it felt super out of place, and like it was undermining the plot on hand. Here, Darkseid really is the villain, and Steppenwolf is his lackey. Although owing the guy 50,000 more planets feels like maybe too tall of an order. What did you do, Steppenwolf? In every scene where this big goon is alone, and he was just talking at this weird slab, calling the boxes Mother.
Mother, I see, Mother. I know, Mother. Praise to the Mother of Horrors.
It was the worst. I hated it. Now we find out this slab was meant to be a molten hologram device. It's pretty cool. Even if it does make this alien look like a liquefied, burnt-up Doctor Doom. But the scenes just make more sense when he's speaking to someone. And obviously it means all those mother lines were cut, thankfully. The Snyder Cut also upscales the overall threat to multiverse level, which is maybe too big of a hurdle to jump when the villain of your last movie was just a nerdy rich kid. Where do you go from there? Marvel carefully and wisely built up their major team-up movies to start at a city-level threat, then global, universe-wide, and only now we're getting into multiverse-level threats. The original version of Diana's history lesson was laughable for how Lord of the Rings-esque it was, especially the distributing of the boxes. It was cut far shorter and edited around to replace Darkseid fully with Steppenwolf, which obviously took a lot of the life out of it. You can't edit something that heavily and have it still feel coherent. And again, this confirms that maybe Zack needs to edit his own action. That's the only way it really looks and feels right. Whedon's attempt to salvage that editing process definitely took a turn that was too Tolkien heavy. I do have to laugh. When the humans are putting away their box, they just chuck theirs in a hole. What a bunch of dummies.
Hey, sir. King, does this hole look good to you?
Yeah, that'll do. This version of the scene is kind of amazing. The fighting is dope, the visuals are spectacular, and in like 2 minutes I already want to see a Zeus and Ares movie. This guy is like if Leonidas and Thor were smushed into one. He's hardcore. I really don't care about the anti-life equation. It's a MacGuffin on top of a MacGuffin. It's something hidden on Earth. It's supposedly why Darkseid is there. He was going to merge Earth into the Unity using the mother boxes, and when he's defeated, he leaves those boxes behind. And here is the biggest, screw up or implosion in this plot. Something that makes me think the mother boxes shouldn't have even existed. It should have just been Steppenwolf hunting for the anti-life equation. Maybe the team could have reverse engineered that to revive Superman. I don't know. But Steppenwolf starts retrieving these mother boxes, yet somehow only discovers after the fact that he's on the primordial planet in which Darkseid was defeated where the anti-life equation is. Did you guys forget? What is this stoner logic from these intergalactic beings? Steppenwolf is reporting all of this to Darkseid.
I have found the primitive planet, the world that fought back. It is Earth.
And for whatever reason gets mostly naked during that. I guess it's a submissive thing. And they're all like, whoa, the boxes are there? Because we left them there? dude, where's my anti-life equation? Like seriously, you guys understand that you're here retrieving the mother boxes because you left them here, and that they were left here because you lost the fight? Like what? How is this some sort of revelation to any of you? I'd understand if maybe Steppenwolf didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle, but he reports that to Darkseid and it's like news to him. It's just insane how big of a gaping hole that is. While the overall story of this movie works because the characters are fleshed out and the threat is somewhat established, that entire thing is so utterly stupid. These flimsy reasons for anything to be happening are one of the main reasons this movie is still held back. Marvel uses loads of MacGuffins as well, so does every blockbuster movie. But at least Marvel eventually paid those off, retconning them as a major plot point that we all could understand and get behind. Maybe that would have happened long term for this franchise, but as is, it's all a little too unclear and far too slapdash. We only now get our first scene with the Flash, and it's easily one of his best scenes. Plays out so dramatically, the slow-mo is incredible, and I think I gasped when he liquefied and shattered the glass rather than, opening the door. The effect of it was so perfect, and it kind of floored me. Not just amazing visuals, but the entire scene takes the time to show us more about this character. Those extra moments tell us a lot about him. It honestly made his bumbling awkwardness through the rest of the movie less irritating, which I think it kind of was to me originally. I started to think maybe I wasn't much of an Ezra Miller fan, but this convinced me that I just didn't know his character, and him running around like a hyper kid just didn't really land. Now that that's established, and I know more about Barry, I'm totally fine with it. And while this scene is important and clearly visually stunning, yeah, especially that CGI, super high detailed sesame seed, and like this weird moment with the hot dog, it's still a scene and character we don't do anything else with. So it's a little frustrating that in this super overly long 4-hour cut, we're spending time introducing new things that are then not going to be paid off in this movie. Maybe paid off is too much, even followed up with. I probably have to chalk it up to the fact that we were going to have a Justice League 2. So I guess I'll take what we can get. So while the scene is a tad creepy almost, I do still really enjoy it. Now for a good stretch of the movie, we have scenes that bounce between Victor and Barry, better fleshing out both characters. And 2 scenes that actually return for Barry, obviously with the goofy Whedon moments removed. I never thought those were bad additions, and was unable to tell who wrote what pieces. Other than it being obvious this epic moment came straight from Snyder, it's just so crystal clear what his specialties are. There is no way in hell anyone was going to reshoot something like that. It's too perfect. But when all this is left in without the jokey inserts...
Hurry it up, will ya?
I can't sit here and watch you run in place in Central City.
It's a little too literal for me. Oh, what is brunch? It really changes the mood dramatically. Suddenly these feel more like real characters interacting in a way I didn't even notice had been undermined previously. I mean, people specifically talk about shows like Buffy having very Whedon-esque dialogue, because it's definably, intentionally different than the way people actually talk. Maybe Barry's dad feels like a bit too much of a doof here.
You're going in circles, man.
He was just kind of generic and maybe a little too cool for Barry the first time around, but now he's kind of like giggly, and he's always dropping these mans in his conversation. It makes it feel like maybe he's a bit more of a loser, and that's not great for the scene, because then you start thinking like, is he a bit of a screw-up? Is it his fault he's in jail? I don't think that was the point. But at least it makes him and Barry feel like they share some of their personality traits, and in that way it's successful, but I'm uncertain on it. This is around the time you start to realize Whedon punched up every scene. What an insane amount of money it must have been to reassemble all these actors and sets and costumes and whatnot for scenes that really didn't need to be touched. In general, I prefer all of these additions. I'm glad they're all here. These new scenes kind of make Flash and Cyborg the new standouts of the film. It also helps that there is zero floaty head for hasty CGI and reshoots. The scenes in Victor's mind are a little abstract. Seeing 2 golden animals fighting to represent banks is like, what the hell? But the VFX is impressively done, especially considering they would have been working on a limited time and budget for this cut. And I get Victor helping this lady by manipulating her bank account, but I kinda hate the moment. Like, did he add slot machine sounds and confetti to that ATM? How strange is that? And is the IRS not just gonna throw this lady in jail now? How will she ever prove where that money came from? Is she liable for it appearing in her account? Is that out of thin air? Did he steal money from someone? It's a really poorly tacked on Good Samaritan moment for the character, and I guess it's meant to show that he's still good and establish how powerful he can be, but it kind of just felt careless and like very obviously laden with repercussions. A new moment that had me cracking up is Alfred teaching Diana how to make a cup of tea. It has this really funny feeling of him being a part of the team, like his power is super butlering. Of course he'd know how to make a perfect cuppa. I still don't know how I feel about Jeremy Irons as Alfred. I like when Alfred is a bit more of a dork than this. This is a hair dorky, but I'd tip the scale up a bit more. But I like this. Cyborg's message to Diana is made more trippy. Looking at them side by side, I cannot decide which one feels more out of place or more poorly done. I don't think either are great. It's a throwaway moment. I don't really care either way. At least the Snyder one is shorter, so I guess I like it better. The context of this meeting adds so much more weight. Victor is rightfully pissed at the entire world right now, and obviously not in a place to be of any help or to be helped. He is at maybe the lowest of his low right now. We get our second F-bomb, and this one feels more earned and appropriate. If this was the singular allowed theatrical F-word of the movie, I think it'd be a very effective placement. This character should be pissed off. I didn't mention it last time, but the way that he blacks out the street to remain hidden is so awesome in either cut. That's a great detail. Ah yes, Cyborg and grave digging. Name a more iconic duo. The Atlantean mother box is only being rated 1 hour and 45 minutes into the movie. Again, this is spaced out so much better. The pacing is great. It doesn't feel like Steppenwolf just snatched these things up back to back like it wasn't a problem for him at all. I mean, sure, he still did it in like a day or whatever, but in movie time, this is a much better placement. The showdown between Steppenwolf and Mira is crazy. I mean, it's undercut by her having to make a head bubble just to talk in the middle of them fighting, something James Wan hadn't addressed in the Solo movie yet. But just as I was laughing at it, I shut right up because Mira bloodbends Steppenwolf. It is so twisted and horrifying, and goddamn is it cool. Don't you ever try and corner one of these mer people. They'll F you up. Just as a reminder, right around now, in terms of plot progression, not time in the movie, would have been the first appearance of Whedon's Russian family add-in. That was by far like the dumbest thing that guy dropped in that movie. So it is luckily, thankfully, entirely gone this time around. The scene where they all hop across the bridge is still here? I don't know, is it supposed to be a joke? I still can't tell. It's just not cool or necessary. At this point, we have spent a significant amount of time with Silas Stone, a character who was mostly cut originally. He's in like 2 scenes before. In this waterway battle, Victor jumps in to save his dad, a character he's obviously had a lot of conflict with and a lot of resentment towards. In Whedon's cut, it looks like an accident, like he just kind of attacks, and it's a surprise to him. And in that movie, I didn't even remember that this was his dad until he said so after saving him. Dad! That's how insignificant Silas was made to that movie. Instead, this scene is so much more compellingly motivated. Victor is overcoming some of that resentment towards his father and reacts aggressively to save him. Him kicking off the fight early no longer feels like this Leroy Jenkins moment. He's in a panic and he's scared for his dad, and flying away to protect him is more clearly shown. In that first video, I said him one-manning the battle was stupid, and then he disappeared for the rest of it. It was very directly irritating to me. I was so disengaged with this background character and that father-son relationship that all of it just felt random during this action scene. I didn't understand any of it. I couldn't follow why Victor acted that way or where he went. Him stating that that's his dad probably should have given me the clue, but if I'm that tuned out of the movie to like not really pick that up in the moment, only gathering it on a rewatch, yeah, something is very wrong there. Now that it's made more clear, the whole scene is propelled in a way that makes sense, with more personal stakes, and actually has this incredible character development where even though he hates his dad, he couldn't let him die. Who thought trimming Silas, as well as his and Victor's relationship, was a good cut to make? It is by far the most well-established character arc. Yikes. Oh wait, I haven't talked about the soundtrack in quite a while. This is another big highlight. Whenever the team is together for a big fight, we get this intense Black Sabbath-like chugging metal sound.
Let's go.
like, hell yeah, dude. This is fight music. I feel like I could take on Steppenwolf after hearing that. I honestly kind of miss Bruce's pep talk for Barry. Yes, it was Whedon aping that from himself, but it made a lot of sense for his character. He would be scared of one of his first fights being against this mega alien, and it showed Batman can step into this leadership role. He's worse at some things than Clark. If he's going to assemble this team of young kids like this, he should take some responsibility for them. He's one of the veterans here. That's unfortunate. It is fun to see Barry taking more of a role in this fight, and there's a really awesome new moment where we get a speedster scene from the civilian perspective. Each time we see it from his perspective, it's amazing, but I love that little switch up, and the end result is fantastic. Again, like with the Wonder Woman bank scene and the historic flashback, the action here just is better. All this footage existed. How did they manage to make Batman such a weakling before? He totally holds his own and kicks some ass this time around. This little grappling swing and roundhouse kick is cool, but this Whedon moment was still somehow the closest we got to that perfect warehouse fight scene. Maybe Snyder's thing isn't really juggling all these heroes. He very rarely has them all using a cool variety of powers in tandem. The Russo brothers probably did that better than anybody, and it just seems like it's a hard thing to pull off. The end result is usually that every hero is just punching and kicking, or that all of them are crashing around like indestructible gods. Or, they bust out these little dinky robot hands. It's just a bit of a running issue through the movie. The action all looks great, I just wish there was more power variety in this big team-up. There is still a scene of everyone planning in Bruce's hangar after, although it was entirely refilmed. I guess Whedon didn't like the way they were all dipped in shadows. He put them out in a more open, well-lit space. He also gave Aquaman this jacket. I guess maybe he just hated Arthur's Russell Brand look that much. But even though these two scenes serve the same purpose and take place in the same location, I guess there was no ability to utilize Zack's footage without breaking the continuity. Whedon just thought it was so much not what he wanted to do with the scene. In the theatrical version, Cyborg tells everyone the box is capable of massive energy potential and change. Bruce then rambles about life and then yells at everyone when they won't let him revive Superman. It's such a wild shot from left field, and the resulting argument is ridiculous because obviously reviving the dead is a stupid idea, and at no point does it feel like he's making good points. Not only do I think Snyder's version is more well lit and more interesting to look at, even if he maybe rotates the camera a bit too much, that's a lot of spinning. It's simply a far more logic-driven conversation. Aquaman accusing Cyborg of being a spy is incredibly dumb. I dislike that.
How do we know you're not working for them?
If he was working with the enemy, he would have just given them the box. It's a weak attempt at group tension. And for the history of the box, why is it always the Nazis? In every movie. For everything. You couldn't get a little more creative than that? And, projecting Superman's hologram is unnecessary. But overall, their level-headed discussion of the box's potential, how it operates, and the conclusion that it could maybe revive Superman feels more well-earned. I followed their conversation of how they got there. It's still pretty dumb, but they reached that conclusion in a certifiably less dumb way. It plays out like a room full of geniuses, minus Aquaman, sorry dude, actually coming up with a plan and reasoning it through rather than Batman just throwing a weird fit. The whole smoke analogy with each character speaking one line at a time is corny as hell, but I was far more on board with them concluding to revive Clark this time around. They also now better establish the plot of the boxes activating and them being tracked whenever they are active. So we now have this added weight of using the box to bring back Superman risks failing and bringing Steppenwolf to them. Those stakes are so much more real and enjoyable. This is approximately halfway through both movies. In the 2017 cut, I had almost nothing else to say past this point because it was just a big old mess of a CGI battle. Now the plot feels much more driven forward, there are payoffs left and right, and the last chunk of this movie is so much more satisfying. I still have less to say because, it mostly is just a big action sequence, but it's just a little more layered, and isn't the slog that it is in the other movie. We have this new scene of Lois speaking with Martha. We could probably do with one or two less check-ins with the character. Most her scenes are very slow, very long, and without any dialogue or exposition, but at least it's showing us that she's grieving. I don't know, before she just got over it? Not only could this have been cut entirely as is, but then Martha ends up being Martian Manhunter, and for no reason he also quickly changes shape again to remind us who the actor is. Why he stepped into this situation at all is beyond me. movie. It's so clearly just shoehorning in this character. And why does he do it as Martha? Lois would trust her, but she's gonna think that her mother-in-law has dementia now if they ever talk about this little chat of theirs. It was just very pointless. He also shows up once more as like a post-credit scene, and that was also kind of pointless and dumb. He shows up to tell Bruce, like, I'd love to help. Well, then why didn't you help this whole movie? And also, why didn't Bruce have some sort of defense system? I don't know, he seemed really vulnerable there. I know it's fun to see him on screen, but considering how many other characters and things you're introducing in this movie, Zack probably should have held off for the sequel. Digging up Clark's grave is still present, but it's not a joke this time around. Arthur and Diana are actually present as well, and it's acknowledged that it would feel disrespectful to use their powers. I appreciate that inclusion. It's kinda great having the Amazon and the Atlantean, the bitter rivals, talking it out in the van, while Flash and Cyborg bond while shoveling dirt. Give some of these characters a little bit of rapport. This scene with Arthur and Diana is probably the best we have from Aquaman in the whole movie, and in general, it's just a good talk. There is definitely not enough of these moments in the movie. It's interesting when scenes have the same plot beat, but were completely refilmed. Batman and Alfred still have a little pep talk by themselves. And while I like Snyder's red cape line, yeah, it's cheesy, but I like it.
If you can't bring down the charging bull, then don't wave the red cape at it.
You do when it's this red cape. This red cape charges back.
I think overall, I prefer Whedon's scene. Zack had this arc for Batman of him starting to operate on faith rather than reason. If he was supposed to have learned this through Clark, did he only learn it after he tried to murder him? Did he supposedly gain faith because his team got pulled together in the end? At what point did he supposedly abandon his reason-based approach? Why the sudden change of heart? This change isn't great character development because it takes place through him stating it rather than anything else. There is an arc there, but it's very poorly explored. I'm not really into it. I prefer in Whedon's cut, where Bruce acknowledges Superman's place in the world and taking a look at some personal shortcomings of himself. I do have to admit that Zack's version fits better as a sequel to Batman vs Superman, and while I dislike that movie, in regard to this being a sequel, I suppose that's the better scene for this movie. I'm being forgiving of a lot of things in the Snyder Cut. I'm pretty on the fence for this one. When the team arrives at the Kryptonian ship, guess what? It's actually guarded now. The defenses previously were this blink and you miss it moment, where they just kinda slip on in. Once you're inside, you're golden? How did they care so little about details like this when hacking together that other version of the movie? It was another broken plot point that has now suddenly been repaired. And guess how they do that? With more Silas Stone. One has yet another major scene and role. He acts as an inside man to help the team clear out the Star's lab and do what they need to privately. He is easily the most important non-league member in this movie. It's so increasingly frustrating that he was cut. Our new version of this scene, again, a vast improvement, even in such minute ways. The ship reacting to Clark's body is a wild detail. It's so creepy and cool all at once. The soundtrack here has this new hesitant longing. I don't even remember if there was music in the other version, but it's perfect here. That mixed with the rest of the scene, the slow procession coming through the halls of the ship, the tone is so much more reverent, which makes sense. They're kind of about to desecrate a corpse. We also get a very exciting little B-plot layered in that was cut before. The Whedon version tried to cut any ties to the Snyderverse, whereas at this point in the movie, it's where the full series actually starts to shine. The payoff of a few small seeds planted do show that Snyder actually had a much larger story in mind than I think any of us appreciated. Maybe not all you super fans, but I struggled to see the forest for the trees. Even if he fumbled parts of it, it's really special to see that all start to come together in this back half. The execution of their revival plan is slightly different. Rather than it needing to arbitrarily be charged by Barry the instant it touches the water, which, by the way, what was the scale there? To the second, the millisecond, when electrons between their particles start to leap and interact? I don't know. He did it and it worked, I guess. That was a nonsense detail before, and it's not present here. It just needs to be charged, and that wouldn't be possible when it's submerged. Yeah, as long as he does it before that, we're good. All of this was changed and moved around to reduce the focus on Barry's time-related abilities, which were teased in Batman vs Superman. By approaching the speed of light, time is affected in somewhat unpredictable ways, adding yet another layer of uncertainty to their plan here. Cyborg has this epic apocalyptic vision like what has been haunting Bruce. He attempts to avoid it, but accidentally initiates it. That is a great detail. When you're dealing with a speedster, you gotta be careful. It's gonna be too late to take any of that back. But thanks to some trippy, wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff, Barry creates an alternate timeline. This is such an awesome little detail, a great payoff to his powers, and possible setup for a future nightmare-based storyline. The revival plot was so weird and uncomfortable before. Now they really logicked it through, paid it a lot of due respect, and used it to tease this incredible concept. Yeah, definitely an improvement. Pretty well all the best hell yeah and visual spectacle moments in this movie are centered around the Flash, while all the emotional payoffs and through lines come from Cyborg and his father. It's just wild how heavily those two characters' roles were removed and overwritten. Superman's confrontation at the monument being a Snyder scene makes sense, almost strictly for the moment of Clark watching Barry at super speed. The best part of this new version is actually the unsettling way that Clark never says a word. I disliked his lines and banter with Batman before anyways, but I just thought I didn't like the writing. Now it is made much more clear that this is just an alien husk in this living weapon. That doesn't work when he remembers Bruce and starts talking about their past. This is a Kryptonian fighting and defending himself rather indiscriminately, without any thought of who he is fighting, and it's so much better for it. Again, that setup of Lois already being there is also far better. We get the whole payoff of Lois's key, but then they also layer that together in a way that it's yet another setup. I'm really starting to wish we were getting a sequel to this movie. The fight itself is pretty well the exact same, except for this awesome moment where he takes a heavy military round to the face. Watching the Man of Steel get shot with bullets will just never get old. Cyborg has his little mini arms that are kind of weird. And the Batman showdown is clearly very different without any jokes or forced self-references. The Flash screwing up and apologizing to Aquaman is great. We don't need clever quips when the movie still has fun moments like this. Like a few scenes later, Batman introduces Alfred.
Everyone, this is Alfred. I work for him.
That's so small but so perfect. Yes, this movie is darker and takes itself more seriously, but it's not devoid of a soul. The same way this movie can have the odd laugh without turning into a campy, oversaturated mess. Did Snyder actually learn a thing or two after making Batman vs Superman? Maybe picking up on what did and didn't work? It's baffling to think those two movies are coming from the same guy. So little mind was paid previously to Steppenwolf stealing the third box. I didn't register it, I didn't remember that happening. It's because he does it off screen. It almost makes the whole team look unprepared and kinda stupid. This was done because yet again, they had to completely cut Silas out of the movie. This very important, very emotional scene wouldn't have mattered, because it would only act as a completion for Victor's storyline if that had been properly set up. I'm over the moon that that whole plot is now back in the movie. Bringing in Silas and expanding Victor's trauma alone was enough to fix so much of what I had issue with in the Whedon cut. As we see in the final scene, Silas actually survived that version. I guess they never would have shown him getting killed. I will say, the means through which Silas sacrificed himself seemed rather unnecessary. I mean, right? Did he have to stand in there? Seems unnecessary. This giant, powerful laser was probably built in a way that you specifically fire it from outside of the safe walls. We have another Batman vs Superman payoff with Bruce actually acknowledging the vision he had with Barry, seeding that before, mentioning it here. I am now truly invested and want to know how Zack planned to resolve that in Justice League 2. This obviously had to be reshot since Zack's version has Victor dealing with his grief and everyone talking in relation to that, and not just Cyborg feeling self-conscious or whatever he had going on before. So the Zack version is definitely better, although the scene does end with this awful exchange.
They wanted to fly. Flight is its nature. Yours too.
Affleck just delivers it too quickly, I think. Like, he had it queued up. He knew Cyborg was going to say that. It feels off. It's kind of a dumb line regardless. But this was especially poorly executed. Again, building on these movies as a trilogy, Clark has a scene back on his ship, hearing echoes of old lessons from his past. It helps tie the movies together, but doesn't add a whole lot. The black suit looks neat, but it has no purpose. And Zack's explanation of it in interviews is super weak. Ooh, it ties him to his family. If Snyder would have just said he thought it looked neat, I'd have bought it and been okay with it. The black suit has a precedent in the comics. The best explanation Zack could have given is that he wanted to pay homage to Superman's recovery suit, and it would make sense with this being his revival. He didn't need to give any more reason than that, and the family tie-ins feel half-baked in those interviews.
The black suit is like Superman kind of stealing Batman style. If Zack would have said, you know, they learned a little something from each other, I'd get into that as well. I don't want to dwell on that. Let this guy do what he wants. It's specifically his movie with his name in the title. I will say one of the other standout moments of this movie was the recreation of the scene from Man of Steel where Superman first takes flight. It was awesome back then, and it's intense now all over again. I haven't seen Man of Steel in ages, but this imagery became so instantly iconic back then that I was immediately brought back to that moment. It was such a great payoff and continuation, and tie-in to those first moments of him being Superman. Batman's plan still feels insane, if with slightly less of a suicidal undertone to it. At least his goal is more clear this time around. Steppenwolf's shield goes down easier than the Death Star. He shoots one weird route and the whole thing collapses. If it was going to be that easy, why even include it in the movie? What a difference color grading makes. The entire scene not being repainted red actually allows the action to stand out more clearly. That feels counterintuitive because this version is more black on black, but Zack's greatest talents are visuals and clear action scenes. It always has been. So I shouldn't be surprised all this action, yet again, looks better. In a funny way, I think Snyder actually borrowed from Whedon here, creating this comic book splash page moment seen in Ultron. It's super strange that Whedon wouldn't have kept that when he clearly aped other visual beats from his own movies elsewhere. Batman is again made much more useful in the fight. Seriously, does Whedon dislike Batman? Is that a documented thing? I wouldn't be surprised if he's on record saying he doesn't like the character. Clark showing up and stomping Steppenwolf is pretty wicked. I get that people love seeing Cavill in this role again. I do too. But this movie did nothing with him as a person. He comes back, listens to some audio clips, exchanges one line with Alfred, punch punch, laser punch, that's it. I don't get why people are so in love with Black Suit Superman. I personally miss Optimistic Superman. He was a more interesting character that I would have preferred to spend more time with. At least we don't have to suffer any sort of floaty lip, and we get a few brand new iconic moments. But otherwise, he is barely a character in this movie. I'm shocked to see so many people on social media say Superman is redeemed or a standout of this movie. Are you kidding? He has like 4 minutes of screen time and 2 lines of dialogue. I don't buy it. There's nothing bad about how his character is used, but he's almost a prop to just defeat the bad guy. A side note that I didn't know where else to plug in, Aquaman is actually worse this time around. Zack clearly tried to pour all of his screen time into establishing how cool and badass he was. It feels like the weight of making this joke of a superhero into someone respectable was too much, and the end result is some try-hard fantasy of a character. Oh man, he's so tough. But also trendy, and I don't know, he's just a bro. Whedon's moment with the lasso was incredibly funny, and it helped humanize him a little, and he just had a few other good moments throughout. That is one of only a handful of things I think took a step back with the Snyder Cut. Someday someone's going to make an ultimate cut that slices together the best bits of both movies. Because that's what we need, another cut of Justice League. The Flash's role in the fight is no longer about saving civilians, as I don't think there are any. What he's up to now is far more interesting and a great payoff, and again a potential setup. At first, it's just about him running around and creating this current of energy, which, like, I don't know, showing him strain and struggle to keep that up is kinda neat, but I'd rather see him just fight things at super speed. But his eventual speed healing is so unexpected, I didn't know he could do that. But the best part is after they fail, we yet again get to see him maxing out and doing more timeline screwing around. I can understand how maybe they wanted to save this for the eventual Flashpoint movie, but maybe this is better. It shows that he can do it in these small moments and small scales. And he has no idea how to expand it further than that yet. I don't know, I just don't know if I really like when one of the coolest parts of a character feels like it's spent on their first appearance. Think of Thor going all out Thunder God in Ragnarok. That is so amazing. It would have been cool in the first movie, but it's so much better having gotten to know him and see the journey he's been on and how he's developed himself and his powers. The Flash didn't exist like 2 hours ago, and now he's turning back time. It's super cool. Part of me loves it, part of me is, I'm just torn.
How many times have I said that phrase in this video? So many of the choices are right on a line where I generally like them, but they don't always all come together and work perfectly in sync.
As he's executing this greatest power of his, he also repeats a random line his dad said once. It's just a pretty weak callback, not what it could have been. But that's DC's fault, not Snyder's. He shouldn't have to direct with one hand tied behind his back because they rushed their universe. And in that way, I'm still all for it. It's one of the best parts of the movie, along with everything else Barry does in the movie, and makes for one hell of a climax. Boom, Steppenwolf's done. The dark side stuff is sealed up. He didn't really have a lot to do in the movie, but that's obviously because he would have been the threat in the second, and goddamn do I want to see that now. The epilogue is largely the same, at least in concept, putting a little bow on things for each character, mostly with everyone doing things related to their fathers. Between Victor, Barry, and Arthur, this movie heavily features 3 mothers and 3 fathers. I don't plan to read into that any further. I mentioned that Amy Adams' end narration felt tacked on. It didn't have anything interesting to say, and felt strange coming from her. She just says light, dark, and darkness 40 times.
Darkness, darkness, light, the light, but the light, darkness.
It's the most generic thing ever written. It's almost infuriating to listen back to it or to look at a transcript. That is just, what are they even trying to say there? Is she writing that? She's a paid writer in this universe, right? That's her job? Who was gonna read that garbage? She's gonna get fired from the Daily Planet for sure. Instead, we now have a much more narratively impactful narration coming from a recording of Silas. It works to have that character cap things off, as well as paying off this earlier plot point of the recorder. Although what he has to say is still pretty generic, it's not just a bunch of random nonsense directed at anyone. It is meaningful in the sense that it's a message made for Victor. Victor and Silas, man, I tell ya. Other than all the updated action and visuals and just generally most things being improved, you should watch this movie for the new soundtrack and Victor and Silas's storyline. But in general, a lot of other things. Shout out to this line from Barry's dad.
Taught him nothing he knows!
Got a good laugh out of me. I just think that's a nice moment between the two of them. Batman buying the bank is still stupid. Before, I just said I didn't like the line, but this time it really registered for me that Zach really thinks the only thing Bruce has to offer is his money. Him being rich is important to a degree, but the man is also a certifiable genius. I'm pretty sure he'd just make an offer on the farm. No? Overkill. We then get a couple of post-credit-like scenes that we've seen before. When they talked all about filming this nightmare sequence stuff with Deathstroke and Joker, and I was really not into it. I was like, why? Fan service can be good. They had that we live in a society moment in the trailer. Turns out that's not in the movie. So in that case, it's much more clear what Zach was going for here. This is just pure fan service in the most unabashed, fun way possible. Why not? Have the Joker say that line. Joe got totally robbed from playing Deathstroke. Let him come back and do it once more. Jared Leto's Joker and Ben Affleck's Batman never met. A cool excuse to give them an interaction. And I vastly prefer what we see from Jared Leto here than anything in Suicide Squad. Again, maybe we still need the Ayer cut, but I always just hated that design. I don't know. Just the way he says Batman. It's gives me chills. It's great. Or the way he offers Batman a reach around. That gives chills too. That part's a little weird. And this is the third F-bomb of the movie. Batman threatens to effing kill Joker. There was all these headlines about Batman swearing, and I thought it was so stupid. Oh, superheroes are only cool if they swear. But here I get it. It's an alternate timeline. Who knows how long these two have been dancing around each other? You can only imagine how many people Joker has killed. I don't know, maybe it's a bit much. The reach around line certainly is. Zach's greatest strength and weakness is how highly in tune he is with that inner child. Batman saying he's gonna effing kill the Joker is supposed to be so cool. And it makes sense. I don't mind it. The original Nightmare sequence stuff was a little flashy. I don't even know why it needed to be there. Guess Zach was just having fun. But now he's come back to it and included an interesting assemblage of characters. And he's established that there's this branching timeline in the movie. If Zack Snyder is never allowed to make his sequel to this movie, I want him to make an alternate timeline, Nightmare-based Justice League. You know what? Why not? If when actually allowed to do his thing, this is the type of movie he puts together, I want to see more weird, out there ideas from this guy. This is the most excited I've been by Snyder's work since 300. I'm on board. The Snyder Cut was very good, bordering on great. But the more I think about it, the closer I think it is to great. I didn't bother attempting to actually count, but I assume I said the word cool no less than 30 times in this video. Zack is good at cool shit. That's almost never been up for debate. And it's nice to see him do some more emotional stuff to balance that out. But he clearly has other issues. I think extra long, epic-sized movies are probably his forte. He seems to do better when he has like 3 hours to work with. Obviously, 4 is getting a little long, but the potential cuts are relatively obvious. This movie leapt from like a 3 or 4 out of 10 to a 7 or 8. I was scared this video was going to be twice as long as the last one because there's twice as much movie. I knew this was going to be a big undertaking, but oh boy, was that a lot. I really enjoy talking about this sort of stuff. I would happily do more videos talking about superhero related content on the channel. I mean, I probably will anyways because I enjoy it. But if you guys like it as well, then I'll feel that much more confident in those pursuits. Thank you to patrons of the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you again soon.